My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened Here Recently?
Okay, so I started running a brand new series on Gauntlet Hangouts for Dungeon World Wednesday called The Crimson Keep. And I run brand new series of Dungeon World all the time, but this one I'm pretty excited about because you and I are getting to play together.
So, I know.
Yeah, it's something that listeners may be surprised to know that we don't get to play together very often. We used to all the time in Houston, but ever since we've kind of gone our separate ways physically, it's been difficult. So yeah, it's been cool having you in the game for the one session we've done. Yeah, it's going well. I like it so far. I mean, it was a first session very much, lots of getting to know you between the characters and sort of building out the world, asking some key questions and things like that. But I'm happy with it so far. I'm doing some different things from a sort of mechanical and a sort of narrative perspective, different than I normally do, and I'm kind of working on that. You guys haven't really had a chance to see too much of it yet, but I've kind of telegraphed it to you already. But the idea is, in this one, it's not an adventure. It's definitely not a dungeon crawl. It's more of, you guys are in the middle of a really, really high drama, high stakes situation that's playing itself out over multiple sessions. And that situation is the siege of a castle. Okay. And so what I'm hoping to do is I've got a couple of custom moves in place, and a couple of custom procedures to emulate or replicate this idea of you're in this castle that's under siege and you are trying to help the lord of the castle, or in this case, the lady of the castle, break the siege or withstand the siege, endure the siege. And I'm really interested to see where it's going to go. It's going to be, it's three total sessions of play, but it could end up being depending on how it goes, it could end up being months of in-fiction time, right? Because sieges can last for a long time. In addition to the sort of siege thing, I've set up the initial sort of starting questions for you guys to be things that are meant to sort of spur the drama within the castle itself, like things that you guys might be interested in the castle, and sort of old histories and political cross currents that have kind of wrapped up, your characters. And so I'm really interested to see how that's all going to play out. I think these procedures I put into place are pretty cool. I'm anxious to see how they shake out.
Yeah.
What do you think so far?
I like it. I liked the setup for how we established, this is the castle that's under siege, and how is it defending against its particular adversaries, and that was really fun. It was really great to get to play with you again. I picked up a character that I played that was actually the inspiration for Ramshackle Crow.
Right, yeah. This is a really old character we dug out of the vault, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was fun to play him, and he's a different thief entirely than Ramshackle, but I think everyone at the table is going to be solid, and I'm looking forward to seeing how all of this unpacks and these new different mechanics unpack in the next two sessions.
Yeah. I'd go into the mechanics. I may yet go into the mechanics maybe in a future episode once I've had a chance to kind of see how they work. But in the meantime, listeners, one of the things that I'm doing on our Patreon is if you pledge even at the lowest level, the $2 level, you get access to all of my GM prep notes, not just for Dungeon World, but for every game I run. And a lot of people have really liked that. They've liked to kind of go in there and see my thought process, my sort of organizational process for when I'm running games. And I've had a few people chime in about this Crimson Keep thing, saying wow, this is a really unique and interesting sort of take on how Dungeon World can go, and I think it's pretty cool. So yeah, but that's something you can do if anyone's interested.
Awesome. Thanks for making those available to all of us Patreon supporters.
Yeah. I even let you guys, the players, look at them because the first session, I was cool with you guys looking at the notes because I needed everyone to be kind of on the same page, like right out of the gate in terms of what we were trying to do. And so I was okay with kind of showing a peek behind the curtains a little bit. I thought that was appropriate. So
yeah, that was a good idea to get us all kind of in the same headspace.
Yeah, just hitting the ground running was important for me on that one. So we've only got 3 sessions. So
let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Should I Be on the Lookout For?
Oh man, I'm so excited for this segment this week. We have just, at the Gauntlet, we have launched a brand new podcast called Strip AP. It's brand new. We've got a bunch of episodes in the hopper, but we've just released a single episode as of the moment of this recording. And but there are more coming. We're going to have a few ready to go for Thanksgiving travel. I love it. So Strip AP, it is basically, we've taken what you and I do on Discern Realities every week with Ramshackle and the Castafiels and all that. We've taken that essentially that format of doing an AP and turned it into a whole show, essentially, with lots of different little stories run by lots of pairs of people. And it's really freaking cool.
It's not just Dungeon World or PBTA games, though, is it?
No, it's not. Presently, it's just so the first games that we have going are Sorcerer, Dogs in the Vineyard, Don't Rest Your Head, and a brand new game by one of our community members, Fraser Simons, called Young at Heart. And those are the first games. We've got about like 8 or 9 more like ready to go. It's going to be a really big thing. I'm sure there'll be some Dungeon World. And in fact, you and I might jump in there and do one at some point, or we could just, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it too much, but we're going to have some people who are going to want to do Dungeon World, I'm sure, at some point. But if listeners are interested in, if they like the way we do the AP on this show or in our other show, Plus One Forward, that very like intimate 2-player, like one GM, 1 player, very tight focused, short AP. I think they're going to like this one.
Yeah, that's so cool. Like, I remember when we were having the first talks about Discern Realities. We didn't even know that it was going to be called Discern Realities then. And
right, no, yeah.
and we weren't even quite sure, like, if we could handle doing an actual play segment, if that was something that we wanted to be a part of the show, and it's been such a great part of the show.
Yeah, people love it. Yeah, people really like it. Like, I get so much. You and I both. We get so much positive feedback on the AP, and I think this is gonna be a really big deal. And because here's the thing. This is like everything we do in the Gauntlet, it's incredibly accessible, and it has a sort of, it's almost democratic, right? Anyone, if they're willing to like record on a weekly basis, like 10 to 15 minutes with another person and do some light editing, anybody can have a little AP on this thread, right? I like participation. I love it when people participate in the things we do. We're one of the only sort of like podcast network / gaming communities that has such a vibrant, like regular game calendar, right? And this is just a natural sort of extension of that, I think. I'm very, very thrilled to see what people come up with. The cool thing about the process of making a comic strip AP is you get a couple of like really solid benefits. One is that because you record every week, basically. You record about 15 minutes or so every week, and then you edit that down until it's about 10 to 15 minutes long, right? The benefit there is you can catch any weird thing you're doing, right? Like if you're doing a weird thing, you can catch it before you've recorded a bunch. I think it makes the stories better because the participants have more time to think about their scenes. Like you have like a week to think about your scenes, and it's just easy to manage from a production standpoint. Like anybody can record and edit down 15 minutes of audio, right? I just think it's super cool.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear more. I listened to the first one today, and it's good.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. We actually made a couple of like preview episodes available on the Patreon feed, but I think this release is what a lot of people were waiting on. So so listeners, if that's something that sounds good to you, if you're interested in possibly putting one together, just get in touch with me at gauntletpodcast@gmail.com. I'll kind of give you some more details. Yeah,
and where can people find this?
Well, presently, we just have an RSS, which will include a link in the notes. Hopefully, by the time this episode goes up, we'll have all the iTunes and Google Play stuff worked out. That always takes a few days, but
okay, great.
But otherwise, you can definitely get it on our website. So
let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be. Jason, this week I want to talk about a conversation that I've kind of had on the back burner for a few weeks now. I was listening to Plus One Forward with Rich Rogers. It's another Gauntlet show. And he was interviewing Ian Williams, who made Action Movie World.
Right, yeah.
And in the show segment, Read Sitch, they talked about what Ian thought was something that's gone away from games that he's not quite sure why it's gone away, which is the initiative role or the role for initiative. he was talking about Dungeon World in particular, and I just kind of had some thoughts on it. I wanted to get your take on it.
Well, I mean, I don't like initiative as a mechanical thing, right? Like, I think I think a lot of like more traditional role-playing games include it. For anybody who doesn't know, initiative is, we're about to do a fight, and everybody rolls to see who gets to go first, basically. Like, who gets to go first, what order do you get to attack in, and when do the monsters go, right? It's normally handled like in D20 based games. You handle it with a roll of a D20, and whoever gets the highest numbers who gets to go. And I don't like it though, just because I think it kind of creates I don't know. I just think it's one more thing you do. It's just one more procedure to engage in that kind of slows things down. But and of course, it's not even a concept in PBTA, right? There is no like mechanical initiative. But I think what you're getting at, and maybe what Ian was getting at, I can't quite remember that conversation, is this idea of like, how do you manage turn order? Is that kind of more like what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's kind of where the conversation went on that episode, where he was basically saying like he was playing with some trad gamers and they were playing Dungeon World for the first time, and they couldn't quite get how you would be able to like, who's going first now. So he kind of had this idea of like, it's a social mediation thing, so that it's not just the first guy to speak up who gets to do it. It's a narrative mediation, like he gave the example for Action Movie World. You have a star of the show, and it's basically he gets to have the first action. I honestly don't think that you need a mechanized way of doing initiative anymore. I think that gaming has evolved past that. I think that it's on good GMing to make sure that the social mediation and the narrative mediation happen.
Yeah, I agree. Just because you're not rolling dice to determine the turn order, that doesn't mean there's not like a consideration you should be making there, right? Like, there's definitely there are definitely things you need to consider. There are definitely I even engage in a small procedure in order to determine like who gets to go first in a fight or in some sort of sequence, right? Yeah, no, I agree completely. So where should we go with this?
Well, let's just talk about it. Like, social mediation, like, as long as you're not letting the same person do it every time, like, you've taken care of that angle.
Yeah, that can be tricky. I'll tell you that can be tricky because I think as a GM, one of the very best skills you can work on, and definitely one of the, I don't think it's difficult, but it's definitely something that if you fuck it up, it can really make the experience unenjoyable for the players, which is, how do you like move the spotlight around the table, right? And it's really easy, especially if you have a player who's very talkative or who always has a great idea or who's always ready to jump in there. It's very, very easy to sort of default to that person whenever things get hot and you need somebody to go and to take an action or do something or respond. And I think as a GM, you've got to be super careful about that.
Yeah, I think that the way that we handle it at our tables, I learned this from you, is you are narrating it as the GM. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. And then you very specifically say, you, player, what do you do?
Yeah, right. Well, and I've even kind of, well, since we haven't played in a long time, together in a long time, I've even kind of like sort of even more finely developed my process a little bit, which is I actually, whenever like there's a sort of tense situation or a fight or something like that, I go around the table and I ask everyone first. I poll everybody. I call it polling the table. I say, let's poll the table. And I ask every single person, what are you going to be doing? What are you going to be doing? What are you going to be doing? And then I make some decisions about who gets to go. Because lately I've kind of been viewing my role more as like the director of a movie. And once I know what everyone's interested in doing, I feel like I have a better handle on the scene and how the scene should play out or might play out. And it just naturally, you get some sort of natural turn order develops usually when you do that, right?
Yeah, and then obviously, like, after somebody has performed their action, like, let it go to somebody else before they perform an action again. But yeah, I think like that's a great way of handling it, is pulling the table like you described, and figuring out what fictionally makes the most sense. That's kind of your narrative mediation. Additionally, if you're trying to have this mediation of like, we're trying to tell a specific story with this scene, like this is supposed to be, the wizard's spotlight scene, like you can let them go first and then let the dice decide if that's going to be their scene or not, or if they're going to need some serious help.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. There are a lot of things to consider. I have to admit, apart from like this sort of thing I do now where I pull the table and then I kind of like decide on the spot, like who should go first or whatever, what move should fire first. I have to say that I kind of handle it just sort of instinctively. I don't always pull the table. Like sometimes there just seems like there's just a right answer sometimes. Like sometimes it's just really obvious, especially I'm always like watching the movie version of the games I'm playing right in my head. And there's always like an obvious like, oh yeah, the camera would definitely go over here to see what this person is doing right now. And so yeah, I think what you're suggesting here, and I think it's correct, is being super conscious of like what the goals of the scene are. If there is like a spotlight character, being conscious of that. And I think really critically importantly, if someone's being quiet at the table, they probably feel uncomfortable about speaking up, or they don't, or they need some kind of like encouragement, or they just need for you to specifically call on them and say, what do you do? Those are all things that you should be thinking about for sure.
Yeah, I think that it really just comes back to this is good GMing. And good GMing is like what you're describing, at least in my opinion. Good GMing is what's the camera looking at? How is this movie going? And then addressing that and keeping the action flowing, and not about like dropping it out of the fiction to roll dice and figure out who's first and who's second.
Something that occurs to me right now as I'm thinking about it, when you ask everybody at the table, when you pull the table before you trigger moves, one like sort of happy circumstance or outcome of that, rather, one sort of happy consequence of that is sometimes the other players need to hear what another player is going to do, right? Like it's helpful for me to hear what you're going to do, because then that kind of inspires me a little bit, right? And I find that to be very helpful. And I think it's good to do it before any dice are rolled, or kind of get all that information out on the table before any dice are rolled, because once dice hit the table, like if I let you go and do your thing, and you roll some dice and you get a failure or you fuck up something, I might be forced via the mechanics, I might be forced to kind of like derail what other people were going to do, right? And if I have a better sense of like what everybody was doing beforehand, I can mitigate that a lot, right? I can make sure that there's just better spotlight, there's better I think you should get better outcomes, period, right?
Yeah, I think it like really demonstrates like every plan is great until like it's starting to happen and starting to unfold. When you get that out on the table first, like you don't keep pulling the table after the initial
just the first
outset.
time. Yeah, just the first time. Yeah, it just to kind of anchor everybody, right?
Yeah, that does a great job of like showing a concert of action, that like everyone's doing something together at one moment, and that's like how initiative would actually go. Now, on the flip side, if you've got a monster that's supposed to be able to break initiative and surprise them, that's just a monster move. Like, it should be written on your monster's move, and you can just trigger that whenever you desire.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, I think you can't go wrong by just, being true, like being really honest about the fiction, which is, a trite, almost at this point, a trite thing to say, like, just be honest with the fiction. But really, truly, like, if you're paying close attention to like what is true to the fiction, what is true to the movie that we're playing in our heads, and not thinking about like, I don't know, like I don't like to think about things in terms of turn order. I just think it's not helpful, right? Like I'm conscious of like who is getting spotlight. I'm conscious of that, but I'm never super concerned about like, like, oh, well, you got to go, but you didn't get to go yet. Like I'll sometimes like bounce between like a couple people for a couple of actions if it makes sense to me, right? But I'll be I'll be real summary and quick about it. But that's why it helps to pull the table, because another nice thing about it is, okay, I pull the table, I know what everyone's doing. There are some things that people say that sound more like help, right, or aid, right, rather than their own move. And it's good to know that up front, right? It's good to know that, okay, it sounds like what you're doing is kind of aiding this person. So that's something I can kind of keep in my hat or keep in my pocket so that when that person goes, I can then switch to that aiding person and say, well, it sounded like you were aiding him. Do you want to go ahead and give him an aid roll? Right, like that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. Another benefit of your pulling to the table approach is it actively discourages naming the moves, because no one, like if the first person's like, oh, I do this, this, and this, and then the next person's like, I hack and slash, so everyone's going to be like, what?
Right? Yeah, yeah. It's just a good. I think taking a little pull of the table is a good practice, and it's kind of like Like it's a little bit like initiative and turn order, right? Like in its way. But it's a good conversation. I didn't think we were going to get that much out of this, but
yeah, I'm glad that we talked about it. For anyone who's out there who's listening to this and you're coming from trad games, I hope that this helped you understand how we get to the initiative kind of outcome without using an initiative roll.
People, yeah, because a lot of people who've never played PBTA games, especially, like they don't get it, right? Like they just don't get it, and I get it. I didn't get it. It took me forever to grok it. Like I didn't get it until I read certain like things that people pointed me to, and I was like, oh, okay, now I get it because I was accustomed to D&D and stuff, right? That's what I knew. One other thing. This is just sort of an adjacent conversation, but it's worth mentioning. This idea of moving the spotlight around and knowing when to manage spotlight time, super, super important for when the party is split, right? Like if the party's in two different places, it's kind of there's a lot of similar thinking that goes on. I think it's best to, let this wing of the party who's over here doing a thing, having their own scene, give them just like a little bit of screen time, wait for like a moment of like tension, like a moment that's like really tension or like a little mini cliffhanger, and cut. Like don't let them resolve it. Cut, and then go to the next group. Let them do their little thing, and then cut, and then go back to the first group, and then let them do their die roll and resolve whatever the tension was. That is I think when you're moving around the table like that, it keeps everybody engaged, and it's just I don't know, just makes for more exciting play.
Yeah, that's a good way to manage the high octane when the party's split. Just keep cutting at crucial moments.
Cut. Yeah, wait for those crucial moments. And importantly, like resist the temptation to let them roll dice, right? Like get all the way up to the point where like there's tension and it's like, okay, what's going to happen? I don't know. Don't roll your dice yet. Right, I'm going over here for a minute. So, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's all that I wanted to say about it.
No, I'm good too, yeah.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here is Useful or Valuable to Me.
Okay, so we have an entry in our Compendium class contest, which I am going to admit that I have not read yet because I haven't read any of them. Listeners, I have had no bandwidth the last couple weeks, and but I'm getting to it. I'm going to get to it. But David, you found a cool one, I gather. What's it called, and who's it by?
Yeah, this one is the Aetherwashed, I think is how you say that. It's by Philip Wessels.
Oh, Philip, yeah. He's on our Slack group. He's a cool guy. The Aetherwashed. Okay. The little color text here, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
When you drown in the fizzy, twisting currents of the mirror water, Philip, I have no idea what that means, but I'm into it. When you drown in the fizzy, twisting currents of the mirror water, you feel yourself dissolve into its effervescence. You see your allies move on. Are they grieving? You see your possessions redistributed. How do people make them their own? You see a doom come to fruition. How does hope die? You awaken feeling the sand of the shore and the harsh bite of the wind on your wet, naked body. You feel completely revitalized, energized even. It occurs to you that it has only been a moment, and what you saw was but a strange dream. The first person you encounter will advise you of subtle changes in your appearance. Things are luminescent, metallic, and or pristine. You may take this move immediately upon waking. You also gain 2 constitution. Wow. What's the core move here?
Yeah, so the core move here, Ether Core, is when you take harm that splits you open, roll plus con. On a hit, your wound doesn't bleed. Instead, it explodes with a blinding splash of liquid light. If this startles someone, take +1 forward to hack and slash towards them. The wound glitters, and it is apparent to any that you are unnatural. On a 7 to 9, choose one. You repulse others with your eeriness. The curious objectify you, or you gain the full attention of a threat.
If you took the above move, the following moves count as class moves for you. So here are the advanced moves. Next move. Infusion. When you put yourself into a liquid, it flashes with light. The light dims down to a soft glow. The liquid is cleared of any attributes except color and flavor, and is now slightly fizzy. If it is consumed by anyone else, it grants them 3 hit points and +1 forward. If they do not have more within a day, they go into withdrawal and gain -1 ongoing for a day. Okay.
Slipstream. When you smack into a hard surface, roll plus con. On a hit, you splash out of another surface any distance away. On a 7 to 9, choose one. You don't bring any belongings with you. You attract the attention of a threat, or you need a moment to ground yourself, -1 forward if you don't. On a 12+, you may create a temporary portal that anyone can use.
Conduction. When you are in contact with metal, it rings slightly, has a more glittery appearance, and is found to glow if in the darkest dark. When this metal clashes with metal, roll +con. On a hit, the air ripples and a spray of white sparks explode from the contact. The sparks ignite pure white flames. If someone is completely consumed by the flames, they are found nearby, having drowned to death. On a 10+, the other metal explodes away. On a 7 to 9, choose one. The metal phases through and out of your touch. The ripple stuns you and you need a moment to ground yourself. -1 forward if you don't, or the flames endanger an ally.
And then the last one, Ego Seep. When you have a moment of physical intimacy with someone, roll +con. On a hit, ask a question about them as if you had succeeded in discerning realities. On a 10+, hold 3. On a 7 to 9, hold 1. You may spend your hold 1 for 1 at any time on the following options. They feel the urge to do what they think you want. So they are either distracted and take -1 forward, or they feel energized and take +1 forward. There is a physical tell of your influence. Describe what it is.
All right. This is cool and weird. I'm into it. What do you think?
I like it. I love the build-up that you like have this almost out-of-body experience when you drink this crazy mirror water, and then like you're like describing it and unpacking it a little bit.
Yeah. It's very surreal. It's very visually interesting. Like if all these things were happening on screen, it'd be very visually interesting. I feel like there's like a definite like backstory here to this, right? Like, it's really bizarre. I know Philip pretty well at this point. I game with him. He plays with me in my Wednesday games, and this seems like something he would do. So, this definitely seems like Philip's jam. So awesome. Thanks, Philip. This is cool.
Yeah, thanks, Philip.
Okay, so listeners, if you want to participate in the contest, it goes until January 15th. We just need to receive your entries by then. You can submit them to in an email to gauntletpodcast@gmail.com, or you can paste the text of your compendium class in one of the comments to our G+ posts. So and if you win the contest, one winner will get a $50 gift card to Drive-Thru or Amazon, and we'll invite one winner and 2 runners-up onto the show to discuss their CCs.
Awesome. Let's move on to our next segment.
It's time to spout lore about our sponsor, Scablands Press, and their game, The Indie Hack. So something interesting. The Indie Hack, as we've discussed before, is all about switching between the GM and the player in terms of who gets narrative control. And that narrative control is expressed mechanically through these things called details. And one of the different detail types is called a scene detail, which allows you, whoever gets to spend the detail, allows them to make a truth in the scene, right? Change something. Usually something it's usually something like kind of short term and not permanent, but they get to add a detail that's helpful to them in the scene, right? So here's something useful. I got a chance to play the Indie Hack for a few sessions, and here's one instance in which the idea of adding scene details was really powerful in our play. So the setup is the player characters are in this it's a sort of like house mansion thing, I guess, like an estate, a villa that is being ravaged by these like random time distortions, right? And at a certain point, like a time distortion hits the house that causes everything to advance, like it causes the house to advance like 1,000 years in the future when it's just kind of a crumbling mess, right? And so anyway, the party is down beneath the house in these catacombs trying to drag this massive bell ringer through the catacombs to get it outside of the catacombs up topside and attach it to this bell and ring the bell because ringing the bell will cause time to reset back to the way it was. Okay, so they're kind of like under pressure. They have to get it done. They don't have a lot of time to act, and they're not entirely sure how they're even going to get the bell ringer out of the catacombs, okay? And the whole time they're slowly dragging this bell ringer through the catacombs, they're having to fend off these giant man-scorpion creatures, okay? So this is all going on. At a certain point, one of the players gets a certain number of details to spend based off the die roll, and he was like, oh, I've got it. Like, I'm going to make a scene detail where the advanced time progression, this sort of like magical time progression that has caused this area to be in ruins, has caused a portion of the catacomb roof to have collapsed down at an angle, creating a ramp that we can use to drag the bellringer up outside a little faster. And the entire table like cheered. Like it was like a big moment. We're like, yes, right? And I think at that moment we were all pretty aware of how powerful and fun, really, this idea of adding scene details was. So just another little story about the indie hack. If it's something that sounds cool to you listeners, I recommend going to DriveThru and checking out a supplement that they've released recently called Noises in the Old Theater. It is a quick start for the game and contains kind of a simplified rule set plus a little adventure, but it's a great entree into the indie hack. I've read it. It's pretty cool. So yeah, go check that out. We'll have a link in the notes. And thanks again to Scablands.
Our next segment is What is About to Happen.
This is our ongoing comic strip AP featuring the adventures of Ramshackle Crow and his faithful companion Scabs. So when we last saw you guys, you were facing down this like towering guardian inside the vault. And you decided to run, though. You decided to run away from it outside of to get back out the vault. And you did. But as you like sort of stumbled out of the vault, you were facing Scabs, who was like looking very scared, and he had been knocked unconscious, and you woke him up, and he was looking over your shoulder and indicated that Catspaw Patterson was standing behind you. I think it might be a good moment to remind listeners who Catspaw is. Do you want to just give us a little summary of like what his deal was?
Yeah, so Catspaw Patterson was someone in Ramshackle's life who he helped Ramshackle learn the thieving business. He was kind of like found all of these orphan boys and girls and kind of trained them to be cut purses. And then later in death, Catspaw was the one who beckoned Ramshackle across into the Black Gate.
And didn't just beckon you, as I recall.
Some hooks and chains came flying out.
Yeah, and grabbed you and viciously pulled you beyond the Black Gates of Death. And we learned at the top of this newest AP sequence that you were basically serving him in the lands beyond the Black Gate for a long time, right? Before you and Scabs escaped.
Yeah, for an unknown amount of time, Scabs and all of us with greedy souls were having to serve him.
Indeed. I have a question for you. You became Ramshackle Crow after you no longer worked for Catspaw, and you sort of got in with this lineal or hereditary, but like this other association of thieves who called themselves Ramshackle Crow, right? Like you were like the fourth or whatever, right, of the Ramshackle Crows. That means Catspaw would have known you by a different name, right?
Yeah, he would have.
So I guess my question is, what's your real name, Ramshackle? Surely that's not your given name.
Man, we're revealing the true name of this Ramshackle Crow.
Just his first name is all I need.
Yeah, so Catspaw would call him Jonathan.
Jonathan, okay, good. You are staring at Scabs, Jonathan, and Scabs pointing over your shoulder, indicating that Catspaw is standing behind you. And you hear, Jonathan, I've been looking for you for a very, very long time. What do?
I slowly turn around. My lips are tightly drawn. Well, if it isn't Catspaw Patterson.
Catspaw looks very much like you remember him looking, except a little more rough around the edges. He has a black cloak and a black hood and very dark colored sort of adventuring clothes, right? Shirt and pants and boots and things like that. But all very frayed and worn and covered with grave dirt. You remember him as a sort of like haggard, white-haired old man, and he still is that, but the flesh from pretty much from like his left jaw all the way down to the tip of his chin has rotted away, exposing the bone that's there. and you can even like see his sort of like desiccated tongue kind of flopping around inside the little gaps between his teeth on the side of his face. And he has no flesh on his hands, just bony skeletal hands. And you two, Scabs, I've been looking for you for the last 98 years, 221 days, and 5 hours. And here you are.
Well, it took you long enough.
It's time for you to return back to my lands beyond the Black Gate of Death. I bartered freely with her, with death herself. Come with me. Let's make this easy.
If you wanted us to go back, you should have brought death. You have no power here.
I think you may be somewhat mistaken about your assumptions, Jonathan. What do you do?
Yeah, I'm not waiting for him to finish his speech. I'm just gonna throw a knife at him.
Roll volley.
7.
Okay, you have to make a choice on the volley list. You can't choose ammo, but you can choose the other ones.
I have to take what I can get.
Roll your damage. Tell me how much it is, and then just give me the scene.
7 minus 1 is 6. So he's talking slowly, like Catspaw always does, and trying to be frightening, and I'm just not having it. And I have a dagger that's fastened underneath my armpit, and I just like reach up like I'm scratching myself, and then I whip my arm out real quick, and a blade plants itself in his fleshy bits.
He kind of stumbles back, and he's like, I warned you that this was going to be a very difficult situation if you resisted me, Jonathan. And he like, as he's holding that little like wounded spot. You hit him; it definitely hurt him. Still, he's capable of hurting still, but he kind of like flips his cloak off of his right arm and reveals that he has this chain with the hook, right? And he just slings it forward and catches Scabs, who was kind of like on the ground already, right? And he slings it forward, catches Scabs, and you see like a sort of sickly miasma of green energy around his skeletal hand that is quickly working its way up the chain towards Scabs. What do you do?
I shout at Scabs because he's between us and the doorway to the vault.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I shout at Scabs. I'm like, quick, shove him into the Guardian, and I run forward.
Are you going to help with that, or what are you going to do if he tries to do that?
I want both of us to like try and bull rush him and push him into the Guardian's lair.
Okay, awesome. Give me a defy danger. I'm going to go with intelligence, actually, because I think this is kind of a quick thinking thing, right? Because he's already a little wounded, so he may not be able to like put up much of a strength fight, right? Like I think it should be you quickly thinking and acting. Yeah.
Then it's a 9.
Okay, that's gonna work. That's gonna work. You rush forward. Scabs also, like, I think, like, he kind of, like, launches himself off the ground. You rush forward, and you're trying to just, like, push, you push Catspaw into the vault, and that works. But Catspaw, he's got hold of that chain, and he's got hold of Scabs, and he just yanks, like he pulls Scabs in with him, and that's where we'll end the scene.
That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Hey, so Discern Realities is a production of The Gauntlet. We can be found on our website, gauntlet-rpg.com, where you can find links to our G+ community and our amazing, amazing gaming calendar, Gauntlet Hangouts. Go find that and sign up for a game with us. We are on Twitter at GauntletRPG, and if you like our show and would like to give us some monetary support, which we love, we can be found on patreon.com/gauntlet.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show. our next segment is What is About to Happen.
This is our ongoing comic strip AP featuring the adventures of Ramshackle Crow and his faithful mutant Scab. Sorry.